We are missing two of our directors. Almost there. Oh, one more.
There's Harry. Good evening, Harry.
I don't know if you can hear you yet.
Good evening, Lisa.
Hola, I'm here.
Cesar, where's your dogs?
Oh, they're sleeping. I just have them exercising so they can let me sleep. All my other meetings, they were like right here. Well, let's see how they do. Don't call their name because they'll wake up.
I won't do it.
All right. It is 6:30 and we have quorum. We are missing one of our directors, so maybe we'll give a couple more seconds here, see if she is able to join us. And if not, we have a packed agenda. So we'll just give like a minute here and see if we can join. We are live. We have a lot of attendees, so we want to be cautious with everyone's time. Happy New Year. We'll start off with Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
One more minute there. I know we're 12 days in, but I haven't seen everybody or talked to everybody since the New Year. So Happy New Year to all of you. All right, it's 6:31. We'll see if the other director joins us as we start. But again, we want to start on time here. So welcome everyone. Happy New Year. It's 6:30 and we're going to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you. We'll start with Director Alvarado.
I'm here.
Director Stanley.
Here.
Director Weiner.
Present.
Vice President Sedeth.
Present, thank you.
And President Cepeda.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Now is the time for public comment for any items not on the agenda. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment or any requests for people to speak? I see we have several individuals joining us today.
Mr. President, we did not receive any written comment. However, there are several attendees here joining us. So if there are any attendees that wish to speak under items not on the agenda, please raise your hands and I'll just give a moment. Seeing no hands raised, we do not have public comment for items not on the agenda at this time.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And I understand that our general counsel has a hard stop at 6:55 tonight. So I'm hoping to hear her comments on a grand jury report item. So I'd like to ask for a motion to reorder the agenda to have item 8, the response to the Contra Costa County Civil Grand Jury moved up on the agenda to follow directly after the board training. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
All right. We have a second. Perfect. We have a first and a second. Madam Clerk, if you can please take the roll.
Director Alvarado.
Yes.
Director Stanley.
Yes.
Director Weiner.
Yes.
Vice President Sedeth.
Same.
And President Cepeda.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you. Also to point out, Nicole Witt is with us today, our Assistant General Counsel. Welcome back. She's attending tonight and will take over for Ms. Collins following her departure. And now if we can have our General Manager, please lead us through the rest of the agenda.
Thank you, President Cepeda. Just 1 second. Okay. So item 1 on the agenda for this evening is a training refresher from our General Counsel regarding parliamentary procedure. It'll be a pretty brief PowerPoint. I did send that out earlier, and I'm going to hand it off to our General Counsel, Claire Collins.
Thank you, General Manager. Good evening, members of the board, and thank you. Happy New Year to all of you. I was asked to provide some regular trainings throughout the year on various parliamentary and legal issues. And so tonight I prepared a very brief refresher on 5 items that I think will assist the board in having more efficient and effective meetings. If I may, I'd like to share my screen right now and just walk through the PowerPoint that we prepared. Let's see. All right, hopefully you can all see this. So this is just 5 best practices for some more effective meetings. I'm happy to entertain any questions that you have. The 5 short topics we'll talk about tonight are consent calendar process, debate and discussion versus the voting period in our agenda, the most efficient motion procedure or practice, questions regarding agenda items, and placing items on future agendas. These are all items that have come up repeatedly in our time together, and I was hoping I could at least provide some faster ways to get to the end zone, if you will. So first, pulling an item from the consent calendar. We will actually have consent calendar tonight following, I guess we've reordered the agenda, so following our agenda item regarding the civil grand jury, and we can try it tonight if you are so inclined, members of the board. So the purpose of the consent calendar is for routine and non-controversial items. Generally, staff places these on the consent agenda because they are interpreted or historically have been non-controversial, and in many cases have also been considered through the committee process and have been recommended for approval by 1 or more committees. Any member of the board can ask for an item on the consent calendar to be pulled, and generally the reasons are that either 1, the director intends to vote against the item, in which case it really wouldn't be a non-controversial item. At that point, there would be some controversy. Secondly, if the director would like to have an in-depth discussion regarding the item. Again, consent agenda items are intended to deal with routine and non-controversial matters. So the staff generally would assume that it would not be up for discussion. But if there is a discussion to be had, of course, the board may and should discuss it. And finally, the third common reason for pulling an item from the consent agenda is because the director has some nuanced questions for staff regarding the item. Item 2 is really intended to have an in-depth discussion with the other board members, and item 3 is really to ask questions of staff. The point here, though, is that in general, we would hope that the directors would reach out to the general manager ahead of the meeting, because there are situations in which the staff is not prepared to be able to answer certain in-depth questions without some advance notice. Furthermore, if the board member asks in advance, that may alleviate the reason to pull it from the consent agenda. Finally, it could be that something wasn't considered ahead of time and it is controversial, or it does require further work. And if you reach out to the general manager, that can be rectified before we get to the board meeting. The process for pulling an item from the consent calendar is as follows. If one does seek to remove it, then at the time that the consent calendar item is called, that director would say, I move that item 3 be removed from consent calendar. It would be helpful to your co-members of the board to explain why. Perhaps it's because you have questions, perhaps it's because you intend to vote against it, but it helps if you would state your reason, and then that allows for there to be a discussion if necessary. The board president would then ask for a second, and if a second was made, then it would be called for discussion. Now, I want to point out that this procedure, which exists in many other boards, was not the procedure of this board prior to about a year ago, but the board policies and procedures have changed, and this is what's called for now under the board policies, which is a majority vote for pulling from the consent calendar. And once that item is voted on, and if it carries, then it would be moved to the very end of the agenda. Again, that's what's provided for under our rule. This concludes my snippet on the consent calendar. Are there any questions from any members of the board that I can answer? Okay, if not, I'm going to move to our next item, which is commenting during a vote. It's very common for— Oh, I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Chair,
Yes.
I have a
Yeah.
question.
Director Wiener, go ahead.
Which version of the board policies contains this procedure? I'm looking at the one adopted July 1st, 2020. Scheduled review July
have one.
1st, 2023.
We have one that's more recent than that. It's on our website. Hold on one second and I'll find it for you.
Yeah, if you could tell me
Under
how that's
item.
done, because I searched the website and this was the only one I could find.
It's under the
Sure,
board
I'll
of
tell you right.
directors. Yeah, it's under the board of directors, and there's a link to board policies and procedures.
So if you go to About Us on the front page, it's the very first link on the top of the front page. There has a drop-down menu that says Board of Directors. And if you click on, so if you go About Us, Board of Directors, then right underneath that, there's one that says Board Policies and Procedures. Here, I'll show you right now. So here, About Us, Board of Directors, and then this pops up, and then Board Policies and Procedures is right here. And then that will take you to this.
And what version is that? Can I see the version number?
Sure, this was adopted February 17th, 2021.
All right. Well, I just did a general search and the version I have came up and it was the only one. So, thank you.
Oh, on the website?
Yes.
Oh, if there's an outdated version, then we should probably find that and replace it. So I'll just point out that section 5.5 is where it says, will be moved off the consent calendar upon a majority vote of the members present. So that's where this rule comes from. And then it's moved to the bottom of the agenda here in 5.5.
And so the public can pull it without a vote, but the board member cannot.
No, that's not correct. It can only be removed upon a majority vote of the members present. So if a member of the public asks for it, then it still requires a motion and a second and a vote by the members of the board.
Thank you, Ms. Cullen. Director Wiener, any
Are
other
there-
questions on this slide? No? Okay. Ms. Collins, you may proceed to the next page, please.
All right, thank you. The next item is commenting during a vote. This rule comes from Robert's Rules of Order, and the concept behind our structure in which the item is introduced, typically a presentation is made, then a motion is called for, it's then seconded. At the time that the motion is called for and seconded, there can be further discussion and debate. That is the time for debate and discussion, so that if board members have opposing views, they can raise those, they can challenge the other members to change their position on any given agenda item. But it's during that discussion and debate period that all of the views are intended, again, under Robert's rules, to be aired. At that time, any member can announce what their intended vote is. This is obviously not a anonymous vote that we hold here in the public. So those votes and the reasons therefore can be stated during the debate and discussion period. However, under Robert's rules, once the board begins being polled, once there's a call for the vote and the clerk begins calling for ayes or nays, then there's no further discussion allowed. That's considered debate, and therefore, at the time that the board begins being polled, then at that time, it should be a simple yes, no, or if you want to say aye or nay, that's fine too, or the member may abstain. So we would ask that if you are intending to state the reasons why you are voting yes or no, that you would do that during the debate period. This is the only slide I have on this. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time. Okay. The next one, and I know we've talked about this one in the past, is what's the most efficient way to make a motion? We do have staff recommendations listed in the agenda each time. And if the board intends to, or if a member of the board intends to make the motion based on the staff's recommendation, it is sufficient to say, so moved, or I move the item, or I move the board adopt the staff recommendation. You might also say, I'd like to move the item, and then make a change or make an amendment to what the staff recommendation is. But if you're not seeking to make a change, you can simply say, I move the item, or so moved. I have a board that just goes, move it. That's all they say. And one person hollers out, move it. The other person hollers out, second, and they take a vote. It just needs to be clear that one of the members is making that motion and that another member is making a second. But you need not restate the motion. And that's where this creates efficiency, and it also creates clarity, because there are some situations where someone wants to be complete, and I think that that's an important motive. But if you're not seeking to vary from the recommendation on the script, it's actually easier for the clerk to record in the minutes what the exact motion was. And if that motion is stated in the agenda, it just makes it easier for the clerk to record what the final motion of the board, or motion made and passed by the board, was. Now, there is a parenthetical note here, which is that the clerk or the president doesn't actually need to ask for a second. You can just run ahead and second it. And actually that happened right now when I believe Director Alvarado moved to amend or change the agenda, and Vice President Suddeth just said second. That also creates efficiency. You don't have to, but it's perfectly allowed. Again, as it says here, motions can be amended or withdrawn by the maker, as long as it happens before the president calls for the vote. So that's our timing issues. Do any members have any questions on this script? Okay. Questions during a meeting. So questions during a meeting are encouraged. They're absolutely appropriate. It's the whole purpose that we meet as deliberative bodies in order to discuss and debate the items that are before the board. They are especially important if they are related to the debate itself, or they're important for the public to hear. So I have noticed many of the members of this board have asked really smart, interesting questions that they believe are central to our customers' concerns about the district. The one place where I've noticed that some things have come up and there's been a request by staff is when there's some real in-depth, detailed questions that staff might not be perfectly prepared for at the meeting. So staff are human, and sometimes there's a humongous amount of data that goes into an analysis and a determination. And in order to get the best possible information, it would be helpful if those technical questions or really in-depth questions were posed prior to the meeting, so that staff has an opportunity to research, to analyze, and to provide answers ahead of the meeting. I would also say that in many situations, those board members asking those questions, other board members have the very same question. But if the staff isn't able to prepare for it prior to the meeting, then sometimes those agenda items can't move forward during that meeting. And so as a matter of effectiveness and efficiency, technical questions or real in-depth questions, we would ask that those be brought to the attention of the general manager as early as possible prior to the meeting, so that the general manager and the staff can adequately respond, so that the board can decide whether to move forward with that agenda item or not at the time of the meeting. Are there any questions on this one? Okay. Hearing none, I think this is our last slide, and this is about future agenda items. This again is a change in the way that things were done several years ago. However, for future agenda items, generally the general manager sets the agenda based on the business of the district that's in front of the general manager and the staff that needs to be accomplished in order to meet either statutory requirements or scheduling requirements or other important goals of the agency which the board has set. So during the director comments period, that's the official time when directors can request that an item be placed on a future agenda. And the director would do so by making a motion for that to be placed on a future agenda. It has to be seconded, and then it has to be approved by a majority. There's a reason for this, and there's a reason for this structure to be in place. And it's actually discussed a little bit in our draft response to the grand jury, because this is an issue that was raised in the grand jury report. And that is this: without a majority, an item can be indefinitely tabled. And so the goal in having a vote to place these things on the agenda is that there is a basis for them to not be held in suspense, and that there is a majority in favor of it if it's not being set by staff. We would also suggest that if you are concerned about an item that hasn't been raised on agenda, or you'd like to see raised on agenda, that item be raised with staff directly, outside of the situation where you're in a board meeting. The staff is here and the general manager is here to serve the board. And so there may be more effectiveness if that's addressed in a private setting as opposed to in a public setting during a meeting. This has been an issue of some dialogue, and so I'm not sure how much you want to go into it here, but if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them on the future agenda item matter. All right. Seeing none, I believe that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you. So,
And I will stop sharing.
yeah, so as President Zepeda said earlier, General Counsel has a hard stop at 7 o'clock. And so we're hoping to get through our next item, which is item 8, which relates to the discussion and approval of the Wastewater's response to the 2021 Contra Costa civil grand jury report. And I'm going to ask our general counsel to lead that discussion while she's here. And if we don't get through it, our Assistant General Counsel Nicole Witt will be able to take over, and she's fully briefed on this matter.
Ms. General Manager, before we proceed, can we just, I forgot to appoint the parliamentarian earlier, and we just finished our parliamentarian procedures. I think it's perfect timing. Ms. Vice President Sedith had graciously volunteered to be our parliamentarian, since now I became president and I was your former parliamentarian. So as we proceed forward with the agenda, Vice President Sedith, would you agree still to be the parliamentarian?
Absolutely, sir.
Thank you
My
so much.
pleasure.
Then with that, we can proceed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So would you like me to keep going, or General Manager, did you have any more comments?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Members of the board, as you will recall, last year, the board directed me to refer a matter involving Director Stanley to the district attorney. The district attorney thereafter referred the matter to the civil grand jury. The grand jury released its report last month, and it was forwarded to each of you. And the district is now required by law to respond to the grand jury by the end of February. The report and the response is governed by state law, as well as the instructions contained in the grand jury's report. My office has worked with staff to prepare a draft response that is presented to you tonight. The response is in the form of a letter from the board, and therefore it requires your review and vote. Mr. President, it is at the board's discretion as to how we review this together, but I would recommend that we can either go through the materials that were provided in your board packet, we can put it up on the screen, or we can edit it section by section. But in any case, I would like to at least describe how this works, and then the sections that we would walk through and ask for the board's approval of. So the law in general provides for the civil grand jury to make findings and to make recommendations. And you will see both in the letter and in the proposed response, those are in separate sections. The district is required to respond to each, the findings being issues of fact and the recommendations being suggestions for how things could be changed. And then we would report back to the grand jury whether it will adopt those recommendations or not, and if not, the reason why. In all cases, the recommendations are requested to be implemented by the end of the fiscal year, so by July 2022. So at this time, we do have a board packet is in front of you. We can either proceed with a general discussion, and I can go section by section, or I can place it up on the screen. I will say that I have a hard stop in about 2 minutes. Nicole Witt can also share the letter. She has a copy of it on the screen if that's your preference. So would you rather have it up on the screen, or would you rather just work through the agenda materials that are in front of you, each personally?
I think having it up on the screen so that way those that are attending as well can see it in case they haven't gone to our website to retrieve the packet.
That's a good point. Nicole, do you have the ability to pull that up right now? It should be in your email.
I do.
I'll begin our discussion and then Nicole can take over for me.
Thank
Are
you.
folks able to see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Can everybody else
Great.
see it?
Sure. Nicole, if you could just scroll to the top, I just want to make sure that the board also can comment on the prefatory remarks. As you'll see, this is directed to the judge of the Superior Court, and we describe the situation that preceded the referral to the grand jury. We will note that the district attorney's referral was relatively vague, and that's something that the grand jury also commented on. And as a result, the grand jury went in several different directions after the interviews that it conducted and the investigation that it conducted. And that's this, whether irregularities or significant omissions in board operations and procedures existed. The grand jury did find that no evidence of serious irregularities in the operations and procedures of the districts were evident, but then asked questions about certain of the procedures. And we'll walk through those as we go through here. So we've restated what the rules are here, which is the 8 findings and 4 recommendations, and then what our response requirement is. So if we'll scroll down now. Before we get to the findings, did any of the board members have any of the questions on the prefatory remarks? Okay, I don't see anyone raising their hand, so we'll keep going. So the response to findings. Our proposed responses again are here. This is at the board's discretion, and so what we would be asking for at the end of this is for any edits and then a motion and vote to approve the response either as shown here or as further amended by the board. Finding 1 is that the board members are prohibited by the district policies from communicating directly with district staff other than the GM. That is true. It is stated in section 2.6.5 of the policies and procedures, and it requires the directors to direct questions and requests for information to the GM. This is also evident, and we'll get to this at the bottom. It's in the general manager's employment contract, and it's in our ethics policy. I will also say, as a general matter, this is very standard. This is standard both in the corporate world and in all public agencies that I'm aware of. The board's job is to hire the general manager. The general manager's job is to hire the staff. So the process includes, when it comes to the board member questions and requests for information that was raised in the grand jury's report, is that the general manager can receive a request, then determines the staff member to which the request will be assigned if it's another staff member. In some cases, these are very specific questions and that need a very specific factual response. And then the general manager would prepare a response to that board member. But there is an issue here because, of course, the board acts under a majority rule system. So there are limits to the extent to which any one board member can take advantage of staff resources. And that's why there are also provisions in our board rules that are, if it's out of the ordinary in terms of a demand on staff, it's brought back to the board for a vote. This paragraph describes that. At this point, I do need to leave the meeting, and I apologize to you, but Nicole Witt is fully briefed on this and helped prepare this draft, and so she'll take over from here. Nicole?
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Nicole, before you proceed there, I see a hand up from Vice President Suddeth. Do we want to take questions as we go? Ms. Witt, how should we proceed making it?
I think that's best.
Yeah, take them as we go.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Yes, please.
Vice President Suddeth, your question?
Yes, it's a comment and a question. So I want to, I see she scrolled down a little bit. So can we scroll up just a little bit to finding number 1?
Yes.
So finding number 1, when I read it, I see it a little bit different than the way that the question was answered. Because it says that we are prohibited from speaking directly with district staff other than the general manager. But then the question says, the answer says that it requires us to direct questions and requests for information to the general manager. And those are 2 different things. the way that I see it. Yes, we only direct questions and request for information to the general manager, and I don't think we have any problems with that. And I think the ethics policy is very clear. And the agency I work at, EC Transit, is very clear. We don't go to our board and talk to the board directly for anything like that. However, I think the confusion comes in here is if the staff is free to have a conversation with the board that has nothing to do with policies and procedures, has nothing to do with if they have an issue. If they see us in the street, if they see us at an event, they are free to come and speak to us. They are ratepayers. If they see one of us and they have a question about, or they just see us, period. You know, we are all living in this community, right? And some of us run into each other all the time. And we may even have children who are in the same, you know, soccer league or baseball or something like that. And are they free to speak to us as just not as the president of a board or vice president of a board or a director of a board, but as human beings who are occupying the same community space? And the way that this question is posed as a finding, it doesn't appear that way. And that is the way that it seems, that as if we are untouchable or incommunicable, like they can't speak to us. And the way I read this, I don't agree with this as a board member. Somebody cannot speak to me because I have some title now. So I read that differently than the way we're responding. So I think that we have to respond to this to exactly the way you responded. I agree with that. But I also think we need the caveat that as community members and as people who are in our community, that, you know, if it has nothing to do with asking questions, nothing to do with a job, nothing to do with that, then we can have a conversation. So I think that somewhere in there, it has to say that, because we do share the same community space. So I think that that's somewhere it has to say that. And that's just my take on it.
So Vice President Sutter, I think I understand what you're saying, and I think what we could probably do, and I think we put it in here somewhere else, is to provide some additional context, which is what you're saying, because you're looking at it as if it's just a directly, you can never speak to someone on the board under any circumstances. And so what we could do is provide that context as it relates to, you know, matters of the district, you know, pertaining to the specific job, or, you know, matters. I think we even say it somewhere in one of our policies. Obviously, if you're at a social event, things like that, of course not. You can talk to staff and staff can talk to the director. So we could add some language in there that provides additional context.
Yes. Can we make sure we relay that to the staff as well, that, you know, this is not, we're not untouchable. I mean, I've said it myself to them. We're not untouchable. We're neighbors, some of us.
Well, so, I mean, I think that's, you know, I think staff understand. I mean, this isn't really this is nothing really different here. This has sort of been this has always been the case. Yeah. We certainly have been a little more deliberate and intentional about making sure that requests go directly and go chain of command and things like that. And there's a reason for that, which is the efficiency and effectiveness of the organization. But we are putting out an employee handbook, and it will also address that. So it'll model the same thing, the same language that the board has will be in the employee handbook as well. So it'll be a consistent message. And we certainly can address this matter at a future staff meeting.
You know my word, my favorite word.
Clarity.
Yes, ma'am. And I think that that's a great way to clarify it, because somewhere it was lost in translation between what we intend and what the grand jury interpreted, because the way that they wrote this, I read it that way. They sent it to us. So I'm not sure any other directors, but thank you, Sir President Zepeda, for that.
Could we propose some edits?
Yes, ma'am.
So for clarity.
Prohibition, no blanket prohibition. Yay, see, I'm reading your mind, Ms. Nicole.
Would we say on matters outside the scope of agency business?
Well, if they say something about, if they talk to us as a ratepayer who are in each of our districts, if they have a concern about, as a ratepayer, as a constituent of our district, they're allowed to talk to us as a constituent of a district, just like a neighbor would, right? I think it's outside of like personnel business. Like, don't come talking to me about when am I going to get my raise. So don't come talking to me about I don't like something at the district. But if they want to talk to me as my neighbor about as a ratepayer, that's still technically district business, right, Ms. Nicole?
I
So
think that's right.
it's-
So maybe we say other than on matters not specifically addressed or not already specifically addressed by agency policy.
Yes.
So we know that we have our board policies that require
ma'am.
requests for information to go through this process, and there's other matters that address personnel.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think that will handle it, and I think that gives. And we as directors, we have our ethics policy that govern us on the limits of which we will discuss directly with the staff. So we know of the line that we should not be crossing, that we need to forward to the general manager and the executive staff. But
And I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, we want to also clarify in here, that there's, well, I guess it's covered under the policy, but for example, employees trying to negotiate our bargain, when it comes to
Right.
bargaining units and things like that.
Yes, ma'am.
And that might be already covered under policy, existing policy.
All right. Are there any questions or concerns with this new language?
There's a question that came in from a member of the public as well, and I think, Lisa, you just answered that question there too.
Yes. I have no questions. I like it.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So next we have finding number 2. Which relates to finding number 1. So finding number 1 was that board members are prohibited by district policies from communicating directly with district staff other than the general manager. Therefore, a director cannot obtain non-publicly available information from district staff about district operations without the general manager's consent. And so the response here is that the district agrees in part or disagrees in part with the findings as it omits significant context related to the general manager's responsibility to the board. So as we described above, the board policies and procedures set out the process by which the general manager manages communications and requests between board members and staff and prepares responses to the board to ensure that matters are addressed efficiently and appropriately. But the board is also the significant context that's omitted in this finding is that the board is responsible for appointing and directing the general manager. So if the general manager were to fail to perform her duties or to make any efforts not to comply with the obligations and responsibilities, that ultimately the board has the ability to dismiss the general manager. And so the finding, as we read it, didn't fully address the fact that there is still board oversight, that it's not as though the general manager's authority here is absolute. Obviously, the general manager is responsible and responsive to the board. Are there any questions on this finding or the response?
We have a couple of hands there.
Director
We
Wiener
have,
was-
we'll go with Director Wiener, and then we'll go with Vice President Suddett. So Director Wiener?
I think that the staff misinterpreted the meaning of this line. And I disagree that we should disagree at all with this finding. The point of the grand jury is to assure that the democratic process is followed within the board. And I believe that this creates a bottleneck. I mean, this having to obtain permission to get information, not with this general manager, but in general, creates a bottleneck to finding out information about the district. And so I don't believe we should disagree partially at all. I think we should agree completely with the finding. And our response should be that we will, that we agree. That's my statement.
Thank you, Director Wiener. Vice President Suddett?
I think I have it's more of a little bit of a semantical issue, because I'm not quite understanding that says without the general manager's consent. Mainly because most of you know I'm also a compliance officer. And I don't think that we only need the general manager's consent to get information that may not be publicly available in order for the board to do its job. There is information that we may need from someone other than the general manager. Sometimes that information comes in the form of information from the executive team. So, and that may or may not be with the general manager's consent. And that may or may not be going behind the general manager. That just may be in the process of what we do. It may be in the, and that consent may be consent that is granted to us just simply because she has assigned them to one of the committees. And so it may be consent by default. And I should not say she, because it could be any general manager, not just this particular general manager. So Ms. Nicole, I think I'm struggling with that. Is the consent by default because the general manager has assigned certain duties to the executive team? So the executive team working with the board, the consent is already given without it is implicit rather than explicit, because that is part of their duties? Or does it have to be explicit consent by the general manager when we're talking to them and we're asking for information? So I think that's what I'm struggling with, is just this tail end that we have. Is this explicit consent that we're looking for? Because if we are working on, say, an ad hoc committee and we need information, do we have to wait for explicit approval in order to get information that we may need in order to do our job?
Nicole, before you answer
is the
that,
question clear? Is the question clear? Go ahead, Ms. Lisa.
Nicole, yeah, Nicole, before you answer, I think that the consent is problematic, but that's the word they use. And I think that if you think about it from a delegation perspective, you're absolutely right. If I have assigned, for example, one of the executive team to be the liaison for the committee, for example, then they've been delegated authority to provide the information at the request of the committee. Most of the time when I receive a request for information, it is being sent to various staff members, subject matter experts. They're providing that information. So I think that the word consent, like you're saying, it sort of implies or it appears as if there has to be explicit consent. And I think that there's really a delegation. There are many duties. All things flow to me, have been delegated to me on matters of personnel as a general manager, but many things have been delegated to other staff. And through that delegation of duty, they provide information all the time to the board. So I don't know if through the delegation by the general manager of something like that would help clarify.
So back to my favorite word.
What happens?
Yes. So back to my favorite word. So for purposes of clarity, and so it doesn't look like the general manager is ruling with an iron fist. I think that I would like President Zepeda a little bit of grace on this one. I think that for me, I would be more comfortable if this response included something to that effect. This by something along the lines that there is implicit authority granted to the executive team and others in their specific roles in the district to provide information to the directors just by virtue of their roles within the district. Like, we don't necessarily go through the general manager for certain information there's not publicly available, especially like finance or HR information. We have been told to go to Sir Justin, for instance, to get information that we may need to complete some of especially President Zepeda and myself, right? So I think that the way this is worded, lends itself to thinking something different. So I would like us to at least speak to that implicit versus explicit information. That we need to. I just think that needs to be in here. That there is something implicitly included in their role that allows them to give information to the directors directly because of their given role in the district, especially with the delegation piece.
Thank you, Vice President. Director Wiener, I see your hand. Give me one quick second. I want to make sure that we're remembering how we got to the point of asking the general manager, where we would have to give her the sort of assignment of a question, and then she would then assign it to the staff. Because maybe a year or two ago, different directors were just asking staff to do things and bringing up staff time to the detriment of taxpayer paying money, right? Staff were out there running reports, running projects, running whatever, and then we needed one place where everyone knew what was happening. That's what we also said the board needs to vote on agenda items coming on, or any projects coming on, any assignments or tasks that we vote on it. So it's not one individual board member giving direction to staff without considering the implications of costs on the other side, right? That we are all on the same pathway and on the same goals here. Director Alvarado, I see your hand up as well. I'm going to go to Director Wiener first, and then I'll come back to you, Director Alvarado. Director Wiener, your question?
Thank you.
It seems like the word that we're having a problem with is consent, but that comes from the grand jury. And they did their research, and they did their investigation, and they did their interviews. And to them, it appeared from all that they did that the district requires the the board requires the general manager's consent to obtain information. So I feel like all this wordsmithing is to try to interpret what they meant by consent and then overturn their finding. I agree with their finding. And even in spite of what President Zepeda said, it wasn't a rampant problem. It was limited to one director, and it wasn't directors running around burning district resources. So I think we should agree, and we should make changes to our policies to make sure that it doesn't appear that the general manager has to give consent to any request for information from the board. And we should agree with this and then make that adjustment.
Thank you, Director Wiener. Director Alvarado?
I think we're opening up a big can of worms here. The policy is clear. Board member has a question or he needs information from the agency or the staff, you go through the general manager. That's been a policy. That's the policy that should be on record, and we should not change that. We shouldn't fiddle with this. I think we're just opening up a big can of worms because the GM is the only employee that we have. If we have a question, we send it to the GM. She sends it to staff, and then they answer the question either through her or directly to us. But I think that we're trying to meddle here in operations, and I don't agree with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Alvarado. Ms. General Manager?
Thank you. Yeah, I did. I guess I was just going to point out what Director Alvarado said, and just to remind everyone that, you know, the board has put in place a delegation of duty to the general manager, and there is only one staff that reports to the board. So the board only has authority unless the board were to change the delegation of duties. The board can only give direction to the general manager. So the board isn't, and no individual board member can give direction to any individual staff member. So the board would need to change the management authority and the employment contract and the board policies and procedures and the ethics policies. All of these policies are in place that basically have set these things. These have been the same policies that have been in place. They predate me. So I just wanted to remind everyone that these are the policies and procedures that are in place, that have been put in place by the boards before you. And, you know, many of the recommendations that the grand jury has made are actually very much in conflict and out of the norm of what is handled, as our general counsel said earlier, of other public agencies. So if the board were to change all of these things, West County would be unusual. But all of those things would need to change. So it's not just a matter of this report, it's a matter of changing all of those things. So I just want to highlight that for the board as you are considering these things.
Thank you, Ms. General Manager. All right, board, we need to figure out what, if anything, we're going to change on this here, right? We have a few different perspectives. So what is it that the board is going to want to vote on and agree on to make that final explanation / additional comment and response? Vice President Sutter?
Okay, so the response says that it is without context, and that is what I initially brought up, and that is the clarity that I still think it's missing. It's missing the context. So the end said without further board oversight, but my question before was not to change the finding this written there about the consent, but and I go back to what I said before, it is not with the consent. It goes back to, and what Ms. Lisa mentioned earlier about adding the words about the delegation and the consent, because it doesn't always come from Ms. Lisa. If she has delegated the, if she has delegated duties or she has assigned someone to work with the board, it doesn't come through her. It comes, there's an implicit so-called, if they want to use the word consent, and use the word consent, but there's implicit authority granted to whomever is working with the board to provide the information that the board needs to do its job. And that is what I was asking to be added here, so that it doesn't just say it's only the general manager who is providing information to the board. It is other district staff that is providing us information. Whether that information is coming because she has delegated or it is part of their job duties as she has assigned it to them as the general manager, then I think that needs to be called out here as a matter of clarity.
All right. Thank you, Vice President Sedef. Can we go ahead and add those notes to this here, and then we'll be able to take a vote on that?
So we can add.
Nicole,
Vice
I think,
President-
Ms. Lisa, you remember what you said about like delegation and
yeah, I think that the additional context really is that the board, the only employee is the general manager. So neither the board nor any individual board member can direct staff. However, general manager has delegated duties, and staff is through those delegated duties allowed to provide information to the board, and does provide information to the board. So I think it's through that delegation. I mean, this is, again, all the context of this is missing in that it's set up such that the authority is delegated to a general manager. That's how it works in all public agencies. And staff works for the general manager, but there is delegation, absolutely. And they do provide information to the board routinely.
That's all I wanted. That's all
Yeah.
I wanted. I wanted that context in there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And while our general counsel is doing this, I did want to just say we do have some questions coming up from the public, and I just want to let the public know for the questions that are coming up in the chat. There will be a time to ask your questions or add your comments during public comment. We're not going to address those in the Q&A. So if you can hold your questions or your comments until we get to public comment, please feel free to bring those up at that time.
Are there any concerns with this, with the new language here?
Nicole, I think part of that, what you just said, there we go.
I'm sorry about that.
I think it's okay.
Got like direct like twice, so maybe delegate. May also direct staff, or I don't know, may also direct district. Yeah, there we go. Yes, I think that's better. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think that's better.
That looks good to me. I think it looks fine.
Thank you, Ms. Nicole.
We might also just say this, I mean, this is the practice. So that this is the common practice. We could put in some examples. I think what we're going to do is we're probably going to create a new draft of this for the board, since there are some significant changes. So we'll take the notes and we can do these things, and then we can bring this back.
Sure.
We have one more meeting before this is due. So we'll bring back a new draft with the changes for the board to revisit this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Sutta, Vice President Sutta, you were the only one to have actual verbiage changes in here, so we're not approving this yet. If anybody has any additional verbiage changes other than agreeing or disagreeing with the findings, please let us know, and then we'll vote on it at the end, or we'll figure out a way at the end, not today, the end, but at the end when we're ready to finalize the document.
Thank you.
All right, if there are any further edits to finding 2, we can proceed to finding 3. All right. This third finding is that the general manager determines the agenda for district board meetings in consultation with the board president, and the response is to agree with the finding. We've referenced the section of the board policies and procedures, which specify that the general manager is responsible for finalizing the agenda, and in practice, this is done with in consultation with the board president.
Any comments, questions on this one? Vice President Sutta?
Sorry. Yes. Again, just a point of context around this. It usually incorporates items that we, meaning the directors, have either requested, or our points from previous board meetings, or from committee meetings, or from or table from previous meetings. So just a point of context, the general manager isn't just like making things up, right? So I think there needs to be something in here about how this agenda is determined. So that context I just think that context needs to be there.
If I can, again, our general counsel mentioned it earlier. I mean, the practicality of this is that the general manager has to bring the majority of the items forward, because the items coming, there's no way that the board members, the general manager has been delegated day-to-day operations. So it's not as if the board member can say, bring this contract forward for, capital project. So the majority of the items do come from staff via the general manager. So it's, again, this is the norm. This is how it works in every other public agency, and there's nothing unusual. And this has been the practice here. So I think that it's like maybe some additional context about the reason that the general manager brings this agenda forward is because the agenda is about day-to-day operations, with the exception of the items, as you're saying, Vice President Sutta, that are specifically board policy, some other policy that the board may have decided they want to bring forward, or proclamations or things like that.
So, Ms. Lisa, I totally agree with you. But the first sentence you said is just not there. I think that the most important sentence you just said, the general manager is the most knowledgeable about the day-to-day operations and the information that needs to be shared with the board, especially on what the board needs to vote on, is not there. So that context should be here. And I would like to see that. That is there's a reason why we have you bring to us what we need to know. So that's why we're here to listen to what is said. So I think that is probably the most salient reason why you bring the draft to us and we don't bring the draft to you. And so that's why I think that is most impertinent about why it is the general manager works with the board president to come up with the agenda.
Yeah, so
Nicole is what I'm looking for.
Maybe we can add in that, again, the delegation of day-to-day operations is with the general manager, who then has to bring the items forward for the board to decide to vote on. Hence,
that clarity, but use the word like the chief responsibility for the day-to-day operations rests with the general manager, something like that. Thank you.
Okay, I have those notes. I want to take a little time to craft that, but I have those notes here.
And I know that it's in the item below, something Vice President Sutta also mentioned, that the agenda is driven by the GM along with the president, but the directors, right, can add agenda items as well as they go through the process. As we've done in the past, we agendize something, we give it a specific date of when it's due, and then it gets added to the agenda. So that's kind of a caveat. It's driven by the GM, but there is room for that as well. And I don't know if we just leave it on the other findings or if we want to add it on here as well.
So I think if we're sort of building out this context of sort of the process by which the agenda is created and how it might be modified, I think we could easily add that greater context either in this section or further below, but we could add that detail.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Any other questions, comments on that finding number 3? All right, seeing no hands up, then we'll go to item 4. And then just as an FYI to the directors, if you, not all the screens are showing on my screen. So if you happen to raise your hand physically and not virtually, I might not see you. So please unmute yourself and let me know if you happen to do that. I don't want to miss your hand because I can't see everyone at once. I'm only seeing those that have virtually raised their hand. So just as that FYI. All right, next item, please, Ms. Witt.
So finding 4, alternatively, a board member may place an item on the meeting agenda, but only with a board majority vote. And the response here is to agree with the finding, and the context really comes from the board's policies that during the director comments portion of the agenda, the director may request an item be placed on a future board agenda. And the item or that request must be approved by a majority of the board.
Ms. Vice President Senate?
Only thing I will add is that to reference the board policy. That's it. To specifically reference the policy.
The citation, as we have in
Yes,
the other
ma'am.
responses.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
No other
Moving
questions?
on.
Finding 5, please.
Finding 5, the board has given the general manager the discretion to spend up to $50,000 per vendor per fiscal year of district funds for maintenance and operations without board approval. So this response here is to agree with the finding and to expand upon what that delegation of authority is. So the general manager is authorized to expend funds, issue purchase orders, and sign contracts valued at up to $50,000 per vendor per fiscal year for maintenance and operations without further board approval. And all such expenditures must be consistent with the board adopted budget and the purchasing policy. So there are additional parameters around the general manager's authority here.
Thank you. Vice President Senate?
Same thing. I think we should just cite the policy, but I also think that the part that is missing here is that she does report back to the board what the general manager must report back to the board what has been spent under that authority. That is what is missing here. So I think that must be included here. So it's not like the general manager is just spending, and we never know about it. There is a report about what has been spent. So we are given that information, and we are given an opportunity to question the expenditure. So I think that needs to be included here.
So we did add information about the fact that those expenditures are included on the monthly report. Would it also help if we added some context about this is also provided to the board where they can ask any questions?
Yes.
Like the board's provided the opportunity. So maybe we can also add that.
Yes. I think that context is the clarity that is provided that you as the general manager are not just, we're not just turning over the card, the checkbook, and you are allowed to do anything without board oversight. And then I think that again cite the board policy that where this was where this is codified, as well as when it was approved by the entire board. It was unanimously approved. Thank you, Ms. Nicole. Sir, President, you have two hands.
Thank you, Vice President Senate. Director Weiner and then Director Stanley. Go ahead, Director Weiner.
Thank you, President Cepeda. I agree totally with the finding. The check register does not tie the expenditure directly to the $50,000 expense that the general manager has the discretion to spend without approval. And when that was voted on historically, it was meant for operational expenses, such as chemicals, vehicle repair, what have you. And subsequently, it's been used to hire consultants, and the board approved this, approves, the board by majority vote approved of that, and it's in our policies. However, we are not given in a segregated way to know what the expenditures were. And I am not talking about our current general manager, but a general manager that has authority to spend money without oversight and then does not have to explain what they're spending the money for is not being it is not transparent. The board needs to know what kind of things are being spent under this thing, because we've given the authority to the general manager to do so without getting board approval. So subsequent to that spending, we need to know what was spent in order to do our job. So I would like to agree with this finding and say that, and we make the change in policy to track these as separate expenses so that we can monitor what's going on in the district and improve our transparency. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Weiner. Director Stanley, and then we'll go to our general manager. Oh, Director Stanley, you're on mute. Director Stanley, you're still on mute there. And we have a new member here. You woke up. For those of you who were asking.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Well, I also happen to agree with all the recommendations by the grand jury. And so whenever we get to the point to where the majority is happy, I would like to make sure that I can be noted as not being one of the people who approve whatever it is that y'all come up with. I also have long been a proponent for transparency, and I have never been happy because I agree with the history that Director Weiner put out there, that it was the monies that were used by our previous long-term general manager were for incidentals, for things that, you know, just come up and need to be taken care of. Now it's being used as a way to do things without board approval, and there is no way for us as board members to know what in the check registry the general manager authorized under her spending authority, or any general manager, it doesn't have to be our current one. And I've long asked for a separate accounting in the check registry so we could know. I mean, we have no idea to even know the total amount in a fiscal year, let alone individual vendors who are hired. So we don't know what the money's being spent on, and we don't know how much. And I think that we should. It's part of our job to be able to know that and to ask those questions. So I agree with everything that the grand jury came up with. And I also want to just make a note that I never asked for reimbursement, not once. So this whole thing was predicated on Claire saying that I asked for reimbursement, but Claire is the one who said in a telephone call, and this is why I don't take telephone calls from Claire anymore.
So Director Stanley, hold on one second.
Yeah, point of order. Yeah.
Yeah, point of order there. So we're right now in the part of the agenda where it's
Okay,
finding 5.
that's fine, but I'm just saying I take issue with that, and I'm not gonna not stop that. So there we go. I disagree with what's all this chatter because I agree with the grand jury.
Thank you, Director Stanley. Ms. General Manager? Lisa, you're on mute. We're all
Sorry.
gonna get one of those.
Right. Sorry. So I want to just clarify what Director Weiner and Director Stanley just referred to. I think that there's a misunderstanding on their part about how the authority has been used and what the board authorized. And I want to be very clear that the authority for, the statement about incidentals or things that were operating supplies, that's exactly what the authority has been used for. It has been always used for consultants. It has always been used for operating. And there's a definition, and there has never been a time that, as the time that I've been the general manager, at any rate, that any authority has been broken. So I think that there's a misunderstanding on Director Stanley and Director Weiner's part about that authority. And we have actually had general counsel go back and look at all of the expenditures to ensure that those have always been in compliance, and they have been. So this may be a misunderstanding on the two directors' parts about what that authority is used for. So I want to just make sure that that's clear. And to my knowledge, prior to my being general manager, this question on the check register and distinguishing what had been delegated to the general manager had never come up before. This only recently came up. So I would be very curious to know what Director Stanley and Director Weiner feel they don't have and is missing, and if there's a way in which maybe we can handle that. So just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, thank you, General Manager. So that question there, maybe we can have at a different meeting because the agenda is on the report, but we can maybe take that up as a different standing item. Thank you. Any other questions or comments as it relates to finding number 5 on this particular report?
But President Zepeda, let me just say this because I think we got these two mixed up. We got 5 and 6 mixed up because there was a lot of talk about the monthly check register. So I want to be very clear, especially to those of you who are listening in the audience. Number 5 is strictly dealing with the authority, the discretionary authority. And so reason for what I was speaking of with the clarity that I wanted to have there was that the authority is there and that it does come back to the board to to review, that there is a report necessary, and that does roll into finding number 6. So I did want to say that under number 5. That was my recommendation, that in our response, and to Director Stanley and Director Wiener's point, it does already say that we agree with the finding, because it is true. It is in our policy. So I wanted to, my recommendation is that we not just agree, but we cite our board policy here. And that we, but that we include that in accordance with the policy, the general manager is required to report all expenditures to the board, and that's it. And then we can go into finding 6, which it already appears we are already speaking about, President Zepeda. And in that finding, if, you know, those expenditures are included in the monthly check register. And again, it needs to point back to the policy. And since the policy has not been changed yet, to Director Wiener and Director Stanley's point, is something that we will have to discuss in another meeting, because it is not on our agenda tonight in terms of parliamentary procedure. That is something that will have to be brought up at another meeting on how we can address that, the desire to discuss that. But I don't think any of us are not trying to be transparent. Transparency is what we aim for. But I do think that in the context of this, we need to talk about that. We need to make sure that we go back to our policy, and our current policy is as listed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vice President Senate. I see Director Wiener.
First, I believe that Director Suddath is correct. I was speaking to finding 6. And I thought that's where we were. And so let me know, wake me up when we get to finding 6.
I think we're there now. I think there was nothing else to add to 5, so I think we're on 6, right? We've kind of transitioned there by automatically.
All right. Would it be my turn to, I don't want to repeat everything I said about, I meant about 6 when we were on 5. But what I object to is the partial agreement, and I think we should agree with this finding that they are not segregated or identified, especially as separate from all other expenditures. They do tell who we spent the money with and how much, but it does not say that it was from this this discretionary account. And that's something I believe that the grand jury further down recommends. So that's my comment on this item. I think we should agree with the finding and include that there's no identification on the monthly check register that these are from that discretionary account.
Thank you, Director Wiener. Vice President Suddath.
So they are identified, it's just not segregated. So Ms. Nicole, I think that's a fair addition for clarity purposes. The discretionary expenditures, because it says are not segregated or identified. So they are identified as to where the expenditure occurred and who the monies were paid to, but it is not segregated. It is not segregated from the other expenditures. And Director Wiener's point about being identified from this other account. So I think that clarification can be listed in that way. Does that address your concern, Director Weiner?
Yeah, it agrees completely with the finding. So
Yeah,
we
but
should,
I just didn't see it in words there in the narrative.
right. But
Okay.
we are partially agreeing. But I think we should fully agree with that finding because it isn't segregated.
President Zepeda, the general manager's hand is up.
Perfect. Thank you, Director Weiner. Ms. General Manager?
Yeah, I think just to, I think we did partially agrees on this because not all of the information is correct here. So for example, we don't have a general fund and there's not discretionary expenditures. There is, so if that was the partially agree. It is true that the general manager is allowed to, has a spending authority. And that is not segregated or identified specifically on the check register. But I think that the partial agreement was because of the way that they've sort of said discretionary expenditures, which is not exactly accurate. So I think we could put agrees because it's okay, but it's that general fund reference, and that's why we said the partially. But maybe we can add some more context here. So because it is not identified, the amount authorized by the general manager is not identified separately on the check register. That is true. So we can work on some language here and revise that and bring that back to the board when when we bring the full draft to you.
Thank you. So General Counsel, if you can make that note, please, for
Yes.
what Director Weiner had mentioned about the segregation that identified, et cetera, and what the General Manager's mentioned as well.
Yes, I have both the notes from Vice President Sedeth and Director Weiner here.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Director Weiner, your hand is still up. Any further questions, or was that just up for? Is there? Oh, perfect. Don't want to miss you there. Perfect. Thank you. Anything else on 5 or 6? Since we kind of took them kind of together. All right, seeing none, then we'll move on to number 7.
Finding number 7. So in the board's 2020 investigation of 2 directors, the board allocated a $1,000 stipend to each to obtain legal advice. In the board's most recent investigation of the same directors, none were paid. And the response here is to agree with the finding. Traditionally, expenses are reimbursed, not advanced. The standard procedure is for expenses to be paid by the staff member or by the director and then to be reimbursed. And this was the subject of censure and referral to the DA.
Thank you for that. Directors, any questions, comments on finding number 7? Vice President Sedeth? All right, see Director Weiner's hand. Director Weiner?
Yeah, the commentary, the commentary does not talk to the actual event where in the latest expense discussion, the board found that they would not reimburse. So there was no procedure to follow to get reimbursement. So I'm confused by the explanation, and I understand the finding that reimbursement was done in the first instance to obtain legal advice, but it was not done in the second instance. So I think this needs to be clarified that we agree, and it's true that there was a difference between the two investigations in terms of reimbursement.
Thank you, Director Reader. Vice President Sutter?
Actually, I'm going to defer to Director Stanley. She can go first.
Okay. Director Stanley?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So in my situation, I was given a stipend in advance. And I know Harry was given money in, what is it called, afterwards, reimbursed. And then the second time, we were just flat out denied. So the way the comments are, it says traditionally expenses are reimbursed, not advanced, but that wasn't the case in my case. And what do you mean traditionally? It's not like we've, at least in my history with the board, that expenses were ever put out there to begin with. So I'm not sure what's the point of that comment. It's sort of misleading, I think.
Thank you, Director Stanley. Was that it for your comment on finding 7?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. Vice President Sutter, do you have your hand up still? Do you want to comment now or?
Sure. I want to be, so Ms. Nicole, I think that there's 2 things on this one. So there's expenses, and then there was they called it a stipend. It was not a stipend. So I'm going to be very clear. And there was this thing about this money for the legal advice on the investigation, the previous investigation. And so the board agreed. So for context on this one, the board agreed to provide the directors with this money for the previous investigation. And there were some parameters around the provision of that money. And so I understand the way this is reading, that traditionally expenses are reimbursed. And so it was very clear, because that relates to our expense reimbursement policy. It doesn't relate to legal fees being reimbursed. So those are 2 different things. And then there's a procedure for if you want your expenses reimbursed as it relates to board business. And then saying that this was the subject of a censure. So this is not necessarily subject to the expense reimbursement policy. So I think that that's the way I read this. You can correct me if it was something else in the way that this was written. But the board took a look at the fact that the same subjects, the same 2 persons were the subject of another investigation in close proximity to the first investigation under very similar circumstances. And so we made a decision that we're not going to keep using ratepayer money, public money, to keep paying for legal advice when it didn't seem like the people were making good choices to keep themselves in line. And I'm being very careful. I see you, President Isabella. I'm being very careful with my words. So the board made a decision. It says the board's most recent investigation of the same directors, no money was provided. There was a very careful decision made. This ratepayer money is ratepayer money. So that was a decision that was made. It was not, it was not without very careful deliberation. So I think that maybe that is the clarity that needs to be made here. One has to do with legal, yeah, the legal advice. And the other one has to do with reimbursement for allowable expenses under our expense policy. So there's two different things going on here. So reimbursement for allowable expenses under our district or our district policy. There is a standard procedure for that, and each of us are subject to that. But the other thing is for, as they say, to obtain legal advice, we are not guaranteed that. It is a vote of the board on whether or not that is received, and it is not something that is guaranteed to us. Sir, you have two hands up.
Thank you, Vice President Sutter. Director Wiener and then Director Stanley.
In the board's 2020 investigation, 2 directors, the board allocated a $1,000 stipend. That was the very language used to describe the $1,000 and was voted on. It was called a stipend. I had never understood why it had to be a stipend, but I was in the minority. And frankly, didn't think that as a board member doing their duty and their job to have to pay legal expenses. That should be the board's obligation and the district's obligation. So that's the first thing. And we'll get to finding 8, where I will also discuss this. But the careful consideration aside, from what I understand by talking to many who are knowledgeable about this, is that it is the board's obligation to defend the board and pay their legal fees to do so. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Director Wiener. Director Stanley.
My comment was on stipends. When I first had a conversation with Claire about this, she used the word stipends, and I also took note of that word because it was unusual for me for that word. And so I took note of it. And so when I first talked to Claire about this, before she talked to the board, she said stipend, that she was going to request a stipend. So I'm just want that to be noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Stanley. Okay, anything to add to this particular finding, any verbiage? I don't think we're debating the actual word unless you want to debate that word. Some of this conversation occurred during closed session, so I want to just make sure that we are cautious of anything that we are going to share outside of it. So again, anything that we want to add to this? Do we want to add more context on why the $1,000 was even in play? Do we want to do anything else to this explanation?
Yes, we did have part of this conversation in open session, so that part can come here. right?
And some of it did come back out open session. You are correct, Vice President.
Yes. So I think that context has to be there, the difference between whatever you want to call it, the allocation of the $1,000 and then the first time, right? And then the difference between that and the difference between the expense reimbursement policy. I think those are two different things. So I don't think that's what they were asking about here. Miss Lisa has her hand up, and Director Weiner, I think he was first.
Okay, we'll go to Director Weiner first, and then General Manager will come back to you second there. Director Weiner.
It's my understanding that the grand jury is not restricted from finding out what happened in closed session. Am I wrong about that?
General Counsel, would you mind advising on that?
I'm not sure. We need to look into it. I don't know offhand whether or not the closed session parameters are also extended to a report like this, a response to the grand jury. But we can look into it and respond.
Thank you, General Counsel. Our General Manager.
Thank you. Yeah, and in looking at finding 7 again, I actually think that the explanation, it's true, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. They're just simply saying, and we can say and provide the context that I think Vice President Suddath was saying, that the board on the initial one took a vote to reimburse the board members, and the second time the board took a vote not to. And I think that's the only part that probably needs to be here, because that's the only part that is relevant. And I believe the item, the item that was subject of a censure is something different than this. I mean, it's related, but it's not specific to this finding. So I think that's probably the explanation that would make more sense for this specific finding, because the board took a vote on those items. And that the outcome of that vote was reported out in open session. So maybe we can just reference those, Nicole.
Thank you, General Manager. Any other questions or comments on finding 7? All right, then with that, we'll move on to finding 8.
Finding 8 is that the district has no written policy on when or under what circumstances it will pay for directors' legal expenses, and the response is to agree without any commentary.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on finding 8? All right, seeing none, that was easy. Let's go to number 9. Oh, just as I was saying, that was easy. All right, Vice President Suddath.
My only comment here is, and it relates to number 7, because we don't have a policy, we also don't have an obligation. There's my comment. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for that comment. All right, let's move on to finding 9. Do we have a 9, or was that it?
That's the last finding.
Okay, no more findings. Perfect.
So if I could just give a little introduction to the recommendations, the process is very similar in that after sort of the findings of fact, the general or the grand jury made certain recommendations, and the district is in the position where it needs to either agree and explain the process for implementation and timeline, or it needs to acknowledge why it won't implement the recommendations and the reason for that. So that's the structure that we have followed here for these 4 recommendations.
Okay, thank you, General Counsel Witt. If we can maybe take a quick recess before we proceed to the rest of the document. We've been sitting for a couple of hours and looking at this document. So would maybe a 5-minute quick break if anybody needs to use the restroom or drink some water or something, and then we'll come back for the rest of it.
I think that would be a good idea.
Thank you, sir.
So it is 8:14, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes then.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll come back with public comment.
Yes, thank you.
We have public comment.
Um, all right, everyone should be coming back. We're going to give 1 minute here. All right. It is past the 5 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a quorum of directors. The other directors should be joining us here soon. Director Stanley's here. Director Alvarado, if you're on, if you can turn your camera on, so he should be joining us here momentarily. It's 8:21, so we want to make sure that we stick to our time here. General Counsel, would you mind proceeding, please?
Yes, before we get back into the comments or the recommendations and responses, I just wanted to remind the directors not to respond to any public comments that are coming in via chat or other ways. We're going to hold public comment until the end of board discussion and give the full board a chance to respond to any comments at that time. All right, so the first recommendation here is that the board adopt procedures by which any board member can obtain information about district operations without the agreement of the general manager. And the response here is not to implement the recommendation because it is neither warranted nor reasonable. The district relies on the general manager to manage the efficient conduct of district business, and the general manager is responsible for managing communications and requests between directors and staff. This ensures that the directors are responded to in a prompt fashion and in accordance with the policies and procedures. It is also customary in both public entities and private entities that the general manager, as the chief executive, has the responsibility to manage staff, that responsibility is delegated to the general manager. And the general manager is responsible for ensuring that there is a prioritization and that individual requests from board members don't consume an inordinate amount of time, or that there isn't an inordinate expensive or use of resources without further board approval. This is a common practice among public agencies to have the general manager sort of manage these requests, and it doesn't limit transparency because ultimately the board, as addressed above, has the ultimate recourse, and if there were any attempts by the general manager to improperly impede board member access to information, the board could vote to dismiss the general manager.
Directors, any questions, comments on this? Okay, Director Wiener. Director Wiener, you're on mute.
Oh, you missed all my brilliance. And now I'll begin with the remainder. I'm going to make a short, very short statement in advance of my comment on this particular item, and it applies to all of the recommendations. I want the public to realize that all the recommendations that the board is not going to implement. The California State Constitution establishes grand juries. A grand jury investigates and reports on problems in the operation of local government. They have a watchdog function and are empowered by the Superior Court to access public officials, employees, records, and information. To quote their website, the grand jury's fact-finding efforts result in written reports which contain specific recommendations aimed at identifying problems and offering recommendations for improving government operations and enhancing responsiveness. In this way, the grand jury acts as a representative of county residents in promoting government accountability. In short, their role is to promote and assure good governance through their recommendations. Because my goal is to represent the interests of the people and to govern in the best manner I can, I support all of the findings and recommendations of the grand jury regarding West County wastewater and ask that the board ignore all advice to the contrary. For this recommendation, it is clear that and this is true of all the recommendations. These recommendations are meant to improve the operation of our district through the board governance and to make sure that the public is well represented. And so I don't want to edit or wordsmith the response. I would rather the recommendation merely be approved and we adopt it in our board policy. That's it.
All right, thank you, Director Weiner. Vice President Suddeth.
You know, we spent a lot of time pontificating on these calls. And I know we have a large audience here tonight. I noticed there's a lot of people who are former employees and a lot of employees. I just looked through this participant list. And a lot of people who don't attend these meetings regularly, so they may not have the background history and the purview of knowing what was behind the grand jury referral, the DA referral, I should say. And maybe you did not hear what the general counsel said at the beginning to let you know that what was sent to the grand jury was very broad. So while the grand jury has a duty, we also have a duty as directors. And as the director of this district, I will tell you that grand juries get it wrong all the time. Hell, I sat on one before, and I'm going to tell you that we're not always right. There's human beings on that grand jury. Some of them are your neighbors. Some are probably your family. And they only are as good as the information that they're provided. And they're not always provided adequate information. They're provided information by a couple of people on here who have been speaking all their life tonight about what they agree with. And I can tell you that I don't agree with all of this information. And I don't agree with it from the standpoint that if you have something you want to say it. But we don't have to hide behind all of the rest of these things. And those of you who know me know that I speak straight up and straight through. And what I'm going to tell you is that when we have policies and procedures, I have a policy and procedure even in my own job, my mortgage paying job. I work at AC Transit. And my general manager, we keep the utmost respect for his authority and the things that we must go through in order to get things done. And when you undermine and undercut and underwrite and go around and through our executive staff as somebody who sits on there, no. Each of us has a role and a job to do. Now, we were elected for a reason, and we were not elected to run the operations of this district. We were elected to do policy. We were elected to do oversight. We were not elected to run the operations of this district. And so we should not be misrepresenting or misleading any of you on this staff otherwise. And we were not elected to misbehave. We were not elected to offend. We were not elected to mistreat the staff in any way, and then ask the ratepayers to continually take the bill for that.
Mr. President,
And
Mr. President,
do not
point of
interrupt me. I
order.
did not interrupt you.
What does
No,
this
the
have
point-
to do?
The point of
What does
order
this
is
have
I
to
let you
do?
speak.
Point of
let you
order, Mr.
Order.
President.
I let,
What does this
Order.
have to
Hold
do?
on.
Order.
Hold on.
I let you
Mr.
speak.
President, please stop
I
the
let,
director from
speak.
pontificating about matters not before the board.
oh, this one's before the
Alright.
board.
No,
Order.
this is
Okay,
not before
hold
the
on.
board.
Let's not everybody speak at the same time. So let's stay to the recommendation. What we can do
This
is
is my
maybe to-
recommendation. This is my
Okay.
recommendation. My recommendation is, so when we have someone who wants to read a statement, here's my statement. My statement is, we will answer this based on the recommendations from our general counsel. And our general counsel has given us some very clear recommendations. Regardless of our feelings are not what we work off of. We work off of clear-cut rules, regulations, and the rules that we have put into place as the policymakers, not the operational team, but the policymakers for this district. If we are going to adopt procedures, we will do it as a majority vote. And asking us to upset the operations here based on information that is very limited to us is counterproductive to making sure we have a smooth operation for this district. And that is not in the best purview for us. This particular recommendation, what is missing here, Ms. Nicole, is again, going back to talking about a citation of our recommendation. Of our policies and procedures. I think that with each one of the recommendations, you'll hear me say the same thing. What is our policy, our board policy, which dictates how we respond? Where do we get our information and how do we get our information? How are we guided as a board? And why do we already know the how, but how did we get there? I understand that this is a process. There was something else that was said earlier about the rationale behind it is industry practice. I would like to see that here. Across all industries, it's not just wastewater or water industry, or this is the practice across whether it is special district, corporates, or most boards operate in the same way. There's very, very few that do not operate in this type of paradigm. So I would like to see that added here in our response. Please, madam. Thank you.
Mr. President, is there anything else to add for this response?
Recommendation 1, no, sir.
No. All right. Director Weiner, I see your hand up before we move forward. So going forward, let's stick to the agenda. If you have, so the question at hand is, do we have any recommendation on verbiage? So as you are saying your comments, or if you have a question about the response, please stick to this here. It's true, the public doesn't, this memo here doesn't share light on everything on how this originated. But we can't go back a year and a half or 2 years worth of history to bring everybody up to date, because we don't have enough time tonight, unfortunately. So we have to deal with the points at hand. We could always, at the next meeting, have a little bit more time to give a history on how we got to this here and why this makes sense or might not make sense. But unfortunately, we have to stick to these points here for now. It is 8:30 and we only have so many hours before we have to adjourn, and we might not have a final here. So if we can stick to that, please, I would appreciate it. Director Weiner, you have your hand up.
Yes. This recommendation is not about operations. This is about policy. And the grand jury's recommendations are not about operation. They are about policy. And my takeaway from the grand jury recommendations are that the board has policies that the grand jury does not believe serve the interests of the public well. And that is why this report was written. And we should not lose sight of that. This is not about what the general manager or any general manager does. This is about board policy. And that is what it's about. And all this other talk is besides the point. I agree with the grand jury that the board policy on these matters is incorrect. And that's the issue and the only issue. And all the rest of this stuff that has been said should be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, thank you to Director Wiener. Seeing no other hands, then General Counsel Witt, and actually we have our General Counsel Collins on the line as well. She is back. Welcome back, Ms. Collins. So if anyone has questions for either one of our two General Counsels, feel free to ask them. At this time, let's go ahead and go into recommendation number 2, please.
Certainly. So recommendation number 2 is that the board adopt procedures by which any board member can place an item on the meeting agenda without the general manager's approval or board majority vote. And you all recall, I think earlier from our training, the discussion of the explanation for why this recommendation would not have any substantive effect. And that is the basis for the response that it will not be implemented as neither warranted nor reasonable. The board could modify its rules to permit a single board member to place an item on the agenda, but in that case, a majority could still vote to table the item, preventing any further discussion or consideration. So this recommendation, if implemented, could have no real substantive effect. Additionally, it gives the opportunity for a director to seize control of the agenda and to prevent the efficient consideration of items that the director doesn't agree with or would object to. So this response is based on the foundational principle that the majority of a governing body is authorized to direct the actions of the public agency. And that is what supports this response.
Thank you, General Counsel Witt. Any questions or comments on recommendation number 2? All right, all right, so we have Vice President Suddeth, and then we'll go to Director Wiener.
Just that I agree with it, but also I'm going to say the other thing, Ms. Nicole. I think it's it should reference that this is the standard. This is not some anomaly that only West County has dreamt up, but go back to this is the standard practice for boards. This is not something that we just came up with on our own. So I think that language should be included here. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Suddeth. Director Wiener.
We've heard a lot of talk about standard procedure. I'd like to refer back, particularly in this, particularly the language used here in the response. So we refer back to Robert's Rules of Order and the purpose of parliamentary procedure. And according to Robert's Rules of Order is to ensure majority rule, which has been mentioned many times, and protect the rights of the minority, the absentee and individual members. Secondarily, to provide order, fairness, decorum, and facilitate transactions of business and expedite meetings. I read this recommendation as a move to allow the minority to have a say about what happens with the board. It's about democracy. So in addition to talking about efficiency, we should talk about protecting the rights of all the members to participate in our board meetings. And this is a way, this recommendation, to adopt this recommendation means that we will be improving that. If you read the report, it discusses how the board has iced out the minority, that the minority has no legs at this district. And what the grand jury is trying to do is to improve the representation of all of the people who are our taxpayers, because they elect 5 members of the board. And what's been happening with our board because of our policy is that no member of the minority is allowed to get anything on the agenda that the board does not approve. So no discussion is had. The board does not have to publicly say why they disagree with a minority opinion. The grand jury is about democracy. So I recommend that we adopt this recommendation.
Thank you, Director Wiener. Any other questions or comments on this particular item?
I'm sorry, I just want to point out that a motion, I believe that Director Wiener just made a motion. Is that correct, Director Wiener?
No, I don't think it's appropriate time for me to make a motion about, we're not making motions at this time.
I'm sorry, I just heard you say I move. I apologize, Director Wiener. I just heard you say I move that we adopt this recommendation. And so I was just asking if
then
that
I
was a motion.
misspoke. I just recommend that when we come to the vote, we approve recommendation 2 as stated by the grand jury.
Thank you, Director Wiener. So
I
yes,
apologize if I misunderstood.
thank you, Ms. Collins. Thank you for catching that there. All right, if there's no other hands on recommendation number 2, then we will go on to recommendation number 3.
Recommendation 3 is that the board adopt a written policy on reimbursement of a director's legal fees for both internal investigations and claims brought against the director by an outside third party. And the response is that the district will adopt a written policy on reimbursement by June 30th, 2022, and the policy will conform to the California Government Code.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on this? No? Thank you. Then we'll go on to recommendation number 4.
Recommendation number 4 is that the board adopt a procedure that requires the general manager to identify expenditures made under the authority to make per vendor payments of less than $50,000 per fiscal year. And the response here is that the recommendation will not be implemented because it is neither warranted nor reasonable. The district has one primary fund with all expenditures, including the expenditures made under the general manager's authority. And they're all made from this fund. So all expenditures are presented to the board as part of the monthly check register, which includes the vendor name, the amount of the expenditure description, and the like.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on recommendation number 4? All right, seeing none, then we have come to the end of the responses and recommendations. Oh, Vice President Sutter, I see your hand up on recommendation number 4.
No. But I just want to remind you about public comment.
Oh, yeah. Not done with this item just yet, but we're done for the board reviewing it. And now from here, we'll go to the next step. Right, General Counsel Witt, I believe that's the end of the document, right? That we're to
Right,
review?
that is the end of the recommendations and the findings, and we've been making notes throughout of the proposed changes.
Right, thank you. And then this will be brought to the board again with those changes added or recommendations added, and then at that time we'll vote on it. So for now, this item will be complete for the board, and then we go over to the attendees and see if there's anyone there. Madam Clerk, did we receive any public comments on this item?
Mr. President, we did not receive any written comment. However, we do have some attendees in our webinar. And if any of our attendees would like to speak under this item, if you can please raise your hand, and I'll just give you a moment for that. Okay, I do see one hand raised. Speaker, I will unmute Speaker Adam Brown, I believe it is.
Right, Ms. Clerk, before you unmute, if we can just let the speakers know of their time that they will have to speak.
Right, so each public speaker will have 3 minutes. And whenever you're ready, you have been unmuted and your time will begin once you start speaking.
Okay. It is pronounced Haddam Brown. And
Okay.
One of the things that I've been hearing is I've been hearing a lot of we want transparency, but it seems that everything that you're saying is to the contrary, because when things are being put out there that says that things will be transparent, like itemizing where things are in a budget, it's being said that no, this is not how things are done. Now, this is a public entity, just like a school district. A board member can talk to district employees to find out things that are going on in the district. So that the fact that the general manager can put a stranglehold on restricting information getting out there is, I think, bad practice and does not allow for transparency. And it seems like many of the board members are going along with this policy, which as a ratepayer, I don't agree with, and I think is pretty shady, sends up red flags, and it's like seeing thinks that maybe they're getting something out of it on the back end. So with that being said, I'm going to yield my time, but I think that if you do truly think that transparency is something that is valued, that transparency should be there completely, itemized agendas, all board members able to put things on the agenda because they are able to speak for us who are the ratepayers that we elected them to do. Thank you very much. And I yield my time.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak? I do see another hand raised. Speaker Don, you have been unmuted and you do have 3 minutes.
You think so? It was
Okay. It won't take me 3 minutes. I think the gentleman who just spoke took the words out of my mouth. I feel that I don't see any good reasons to push back and ignore the grand jury's recommendations. They're here for a reason. You guys were obviously referred to them because of some problematic things that people saw. And my feeling is that the board should do their very best to adopt the recommendations of the grand jury, at least 90% of them, in my humble opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the public, members of the public? You can please raise your hand. Seeing no other hands raised, that is the end of our public comment.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I want to just make a quick comment before we go to the next meeting. I appreciate everyone that's here attending the meeting. Please attend the next one as we complete and wrap up this item. we've heard your comments and we want to make sure that we address them. And it also sounds like we need to give a little bit more background. I can see how taking these out of context, I agree with your comments first. Out of context, they don't make sense. But once you put them into the greater scheme of the context of how these policies were created, and actually some of these policies were created by every single board member here, even though speaking against some of the policies that they helped write. So again, so I think some context at the next meeting is something we'll need to work for or towards, so the public knows that these were not just sort of popped up out of nowhere, that there's actually a whole reason why these came about and why all of the board members voted for these policies or again, helped create these policies themselves. So with that there, Ms. Martinez, let's see here. I think we need to go into the next item, trying to bring up the agenda. So again, we will not have a motion in this item because this will be coming back on the agenda. And with that, we'll move on to the consent calendar, please. General Manager.
Thank you, President Cepeda. Yep, so the next item, as you mentioned, is the consent calendar. And the consent calendar consists of items 2 through 5. And if there are no questions from the clarification questions from the board or any members of the public that want to speak on any of these items, we would recommend the board make a motion. Make a motion to approve the items.
So moved.
Wait, Brenda, do we have any public comment?
Madam General Manager, we did not receive any written comments. And if there are any attendees that would like to speak under the consent calendar items, if you can please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, we do not have public comment for the consent calendar items.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So we have a motion to approve the consent calendar. All right, do we have a second? All right, we have a second. All right, Madam Clerk, if you can please take the roll.
Well, you have a hand up.
Yeah,
sorry.
Mr. Chair, I just
yes.
wanted to point out that on item 2, there's an incorrect date on the signature line.
Thanks so much, Director Wiener. Madam Clerk, if you can please make note of that. And then with that correction there, we have the motion in a second. Please take the roll.
Thank you. Director Alvarado?
Yes.
Director Stanley?
Yes.
Director Wiener?
Yes,
Vice President Sedith?
Yes.
And President Cepeda?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is director compensation, and staff has prepared a staff report and provided the board with a not with a recommendation, I'm sorry, but with a comparison of the compensation that the board is eligible to increase their per diems to, as well as a comparison to other agencies in the area. So with that, I will turn it over to you, President Cepeda, if we don't have any public comments. Can you see if we have any public comments on that, Brenda?
Madam General Manager, we did not receive any written comments. And if there are any attendees in our webinar that would like to speak under this item, I will give you just a moment to raise your hand. Seeing none raised, we do not have public comment for this item.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Directors, we have this in front of us. Are there any questions or comments on the proposed item in front of us?
Mr. President.
Yes, Director Wiener.
I move that the board follow tradition and leave the compensation unchanged and sign, and then individually decide how much of the compensation they wish to take.
A second.
Thank you for that. And we have a motion and a second. Before we take the vote, Madam Clerk or General Manager, would you mind pulling up just again? We have a lot of attendees, and I want to make sure in case they didn't get a chance to look at the report themselves, so they can see what Director Reno was referring to. That the pay for the directors has been the same for the past, I don't know, 20, 30 years or something.
Since 2006 was the last time it was increased.
Okay, thank you. Just so that way
Brendan,
everybody
can
can
you
see
pull
it.
that attachment up?
Yeah. Perfect.
So just for the sake of clarity for anyone, so the board has not increased its compensation since 2006. It's currently set at 265. Brenda, can you go back down to the eligible? The board is actually eligible at this time to increase its per diem to $579.22. And that's what Director Wiener was referring to, the numbers.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Let's see here. We have a question, or is it parliamentarian, Ms. Vice President Sutter?
Yeah,
we
we're in
do have
discussion.
the motion on the floor, so.
Yeah. And we're in discussion, right?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, my comment is that well, I agree with it from the aspect that, you know, and it has nothing to do with tradition. That means nothing to me. It has to do more so with, as we discussed last year, is the times that we're living in. That there are people who don't get this kind of, you know, increase in their salaries, and we are also increasing ratepayers. I mean, that would be increasing my own rate, right? And so I just don't think it's appropriate to be increasing compensation for ourselves and then also increasing ratepayers at the same time. I guess that would be putting it in the right pocket and taking it out of the left pocket, since we all live in the district. But also there's just people, the times we're living in where, you know, we're in these economic times. So I think that that's the stipulation rather than whether or not it's traditional or not. For me, speaking for myself, I just think that that is not something that I feel comfortable with. So no, I think we stay it because of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Sutter. Any other comments or questions from directors? All right, and I will just make a quick comment. This comment is tied to one of our next items as well. But as I was looking at the committees that all of the board members are attending, right? I'm remiss to not say that I was struggling a little bit, trying to stretch the four of us that could be in committees. Several of us have to be in several committees because we are minus one director that unfortunately is not able to help us out because that director has been censored. So keeping that in mind, I want to thank everyone for doing a little extra work there and joining extra committees and giving, you know, some of your time to the extra committees in there. So just keeping that in mind as well, right? Part of the compensation, we are doing a little bit extra, trying to keep the agency afloat and moving forward with all the committees. So thank you. So with that, if there's no other questions or comments, Madam Clerk, if you can please take the roll.
Mr. President, I do see a hand raised on our attendee list. So if we can allow this public speaker to, if I can just unmute them and.
If you could please give them a time.
Sure. And so public speaker Marcia Lowry, you do have 3 minutes and you have been unmuted.
Marcia
Ms.
Lowry,
Lowry, are you still there?
Marcia, you might have put yourself back on mute. Oh, there we go, maybe.
Okay, so they have lowered their hand, and I will go ahead and continue then with.
Back.
Hi, Ms. Lowry, you do have 3 minutes, and whenever you're ready.
Marcia Lowry, you might be double muted. I don't know if you're on the phone and also on your laptop, but we're not able to hear anything.
So unmute her.
She has been unmuted.
What about the phone?
Yeah, we're not sure if the phone's attached to Marcia Lowry or not. Marcia,
That number has been unmuted as well. So,
Mr.
Okay.
President, can we move on, please?
yeah, thank you, Director Alvarado. All right, at this time, we're going to have to move on. Marcia Lowry, you're having some technical difficulties. Please let us know if we can answer your questions at a later time then, or if you want to give your comments at a later time, please go ahead and email the clerk, and the clerk will make sure that we get that comment. So thank you. Clerk, Ms. Clerk, will you please mind taking the roll?
okay, we'll move forward with roll call with Director Alvarado.
Before I vote, what are we voting for again? I'm sorry.
So the motion was to move forward with the item. So the item is to adopt. Oh, all right, Ms. Clerk, will you mind reading the motion, please? Bring up my.
It's to consider a change to compensation for members of the Board of Directors for days of service. And there was a motion from Director Weiner and seconded by Director Stanley.
To not
Change
change
the
it.
compensation?
To not change the
To
compensation.
not change the compensation.
Okay, gotcha. Yes.
Thank you. We'll move forward with Director Stanley.
Yes.
Director Weiner,
Yes.
Vice President Sedith.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And President Cepeda.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Okay, the next item on the agenda are the board committee appointments. And I'm going to turn it over to you, President Cepeda.
Thank you, General Manager. Ms. Clerk, will you please mind bringing up that item? So again, so the members, the attendees can see. And as our clerk is bringing that up, again, I want to thank all of the directors for stretching yourselves a little bit more in trying to fill the gaps for the different committees and for the different organizations. And Madam Clerk, this is.
I currently have the committee charter up for finance and administration. If you'd like, I can pull up the committee list from our 2021, if you'd like.
No, Brenda, we have the proposed list that was sent out today of 2022, the 2022 committee assignments. That was sent out this afternoon to all of the board members.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Director Weiner.
I would like to ask if if it was different than the one that was already in the packet that I reviewed. I'm pretty sure I reviewed both, but I didn't see any differences.
Yes, there will be a slight change to one of them. I think the name got moved around. So the change that I will be asking the board to adopt is, let's see if I can bring it up here.
So if I can just clarify, President Zepeda, the one that was actually in the board packet was not the 2022 proposed. It was only the last year's assignments. So the board just received this information this afternoon. So Director Weiner wouldn't have seen that in the packet. The one he has in the packet is different.
Thank you, General Manager. So yes, so then what we received this afternoon is what I'll be asking the board to approve. And it is different than what's in the packet. It did get updated a little bit. Let's see if we can bring it up. Is this this is the 2022. So the only change here is, let's see here, where did it go? For the ad hoc committee, having Vice President Suddeth be the alternate, and then Director Alvarado be one of the members. That was supposed to be switched around. So that was the only correction that we have on there. And then,
So, can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
yeah, so for the ad hoc committee, so we're going to be creating an ad hoc committee to review, for the review process for the general manager and the general counsel. And the change there, when we typed it up, it flipped the names. So Director Alvarado will be the member of the ad hoc, and then Vice President Suddeth will be the alternate member to the ad hoc committee. So that's the change. So we're flipping those two names there. And then for the industry-related organizations, I found out that some of these organizations, and also for the JPA, they changed they reorganized mid-year. We organized at the beginning of the year. So if we can bring this back up for the industry-related organizations in July to give an opportunity for other members to join or change. I know that Vice President Suddeth might want to take a break, but wants to stay on until the change at the organizational level takes shape. So if we can do that, please. So if we can entertain a motion to approve with the change of the ad hoc committee members switching, and then again, bringing the organizations back in July.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Do we have any discussion? All right, hearing none. Again, thank you very much for all of the directors making yourselves, for some of us, it's very busy times with family or anything else, and you're stretching yourselves to help out to pick up the slack of others. So thank you so very much. Then we have a first and a second. Madam Clerk, if you could please take the vote.
Thank you, Director Alvarado.
Yes.
Thank you, Director Stanley.
No.
Director Weiner,
Yes.
Vice President Suddeth,
Yes.
and President Zepeda.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is other business reports from general counsel, staff, and general manager, and we do not have any reports at this time. So the next item are director comments and meeting reports.
Thank you, General Manager. Directors, any comments or reports?
In the interest of time, I'll get it next meeting. Thank you.
All right. You don't want to be here till later?
No.
All right, Director Weiner, I see your hand up.
Yes, I attended the Oh,
Nope, you're
look at
good. You're
that.
good.
Okay. I attended the El Sobrante Chamber of Commerce and the Mayor's Conference.
Thank you, Director Green. Vice President Senate. You are on mute.
You can't see me? I attended. I was able to attend last week. I'm just going to tell you this big highlight. So last week we started the water education for Latino leaders. Started last week. Yay! We started our 2022 cohort down in Coachella Valley. It was educational, eye-opening, and a little bit heartbreaking at the same time to see, you know that people do not have access to clean, fresh water and sanitation, but to see in person some of the conditions is there's some people living in some third world situations. It's the work that we do, the work that those of you who are still on the line, who work in the street, up to your thighs, the work that you do is really important. These are people who are getting their water from poison wells. And we met a woman, I'll just tell you this very quickly, but we met a woman who gave us access to her home. She lives in a Palanco. Those who don't know, that is like a mobile home village. And they give their water from a system that has to go under their counter to filter the water through. And she was telling us a story about how her hair is falling out, and her daughter, her 11-year-old daughter's hair is falling out and getting rashes from using the water, the regular water. So they have to drink bottled water, and they have to use this filtration system because the water, the regular water from the well and the regular line water is poison, and there's arsenic in it. And we hear these stories often. And one of the other ladies said she complained to the property owner, and he just said, "You don't like it, move." This trip that we will be taking over the next 6 months 5 months throughout California will give us the kind of frontline education that cannot be bought in books or online. And it will inform us on the kind of water and wastewater policies that we need to be writing and helping the governors, the Office for Water Resources, write to assist California, the 5th largest economy in the world. You would not know that we have tens of millions of people who do not have access to clean, fresh water and sanitation systems. So all of the other things that you heard tonight, I want to make sure that you leave knowing that the work that you do is very important. The work that you do is very important. The work that you do is extremely important. And there are people who need you to continue to do the work that you do. And that's every one of you, because the entire system depends on each one of you and each one of us who made the policies, but especially each one of you on staff, because I don't want to see another person like the people we saw this last week, even though I know I still have 5 more weeks, 5 more months to do this. But that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Summit. Director Alvarado, I think you said you had no comments, so thank you. I have no reports at this time, but I do want to just do a quick comment. I want to thank all the attendees. Thank you for coming out and for staying with us so late. While you're here, just remember, don't flush your flushable wipes because they're not really flushable. We're dealing with that. So don't pay no mind. There is no such thing as flushable wipes. Also, follow us on social media. Please come back at the next meeting. It is really uplifting to hear different voices. And please join us at every meeting because you are paying your rates. You should know what's going on, be involved, come in and ask us questions and give your comments so that we can better help lead this agency. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. We look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Madam Clerk, will you please remind us when the next meeting will be?
Thank you. Our next meeting will be on February 2nd.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Director Wiener.
I see that there's a hand raised on the attendee list.
There are. We have no public comment left. Ms. Collins, are we able to take public comments still? I think we can.
It's at the board's discretion. Generally not, but we may have missed it during the public comment period. So I would ask that we at least entertain the member of the public at this time.
Perfect. Thank you. Director Alvarado.
I have my hand up.
Yep.
That's a mistake. Go
All right.
Niners. Go
Yep.
Niners.
No,
Go
all
Niners.
right,
Go
thank you.
Raiders.
Madam Clerk, would you mind please asking the individual that has the hand up, see if we can unmute that person and listen to the comment.
Thank you. I have allowed Public Speaker Winter to, I've unmuted their speaker, and they do have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, yeah.
So a couple of things. My question that I posted didn't seem to get answered, but so back to how would a board member know if the general manager is doing a good job if the only person a board member can talk to is the general manager? They have to be able to, you know, get information from other sources to see if, you know, things are being done properly. And my other question is, as being the former union president, if a board member wants to have a union endorsement, how can a board member not have to have a conversation with a union member on how things are going, how they feel, how their job is, so they can, you know, deserve that endorsement? So those are my 2 questions.
Thank you.
I just like to point out to the board that this is a public comment period and not a question and answer period. And therefore we can record Mr. Winter's questions for the record, and at the next meeting, they can be addressed if the board so chooses.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Thank you, Mr. Winter, for your questions and your comments there. With that there, we have reached the end of the agenda, Madam Clerk. And again, Mr. Winter, as Ms. Collins said, we'll take those comments and then see how if we can fit them into one of the next agendas here. So thank you. Madam Clerk, if you can please lead us to the next item.
I'll go ahead and defer to the general manager.
Adjournment.
Oh, adjournment.
Sorry, I threw a trick question.
I thought I missed something.
Sorry, I should have phrased it as Ms. Vice President Sunneth used to say, my favorite part of the agenda. I was trying to be different. Sorry, I threw a curveball at you. You're like, what item? So
Last
our
item,
favorite part.
adjournment.
Thank you so much. Have a beautiful evening, everybody. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.